All right, welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome our presenters this evening. So Dr. Liz Kolb from the School of Ed and Professor Kristin Fontichiaro from the School of Information and Dr. Beth Sherman from the School of Social Work have teamed up to help people navigate the digital landscape with confidence and intention. In this session, they will share what local middle school students are doing on devices, as well as the current research on mental health and screen use for teens and tweens. Finally, they will consider personal use and setting healthy boundaries around screen time to foster open communication about digital health. The passion and care that each of these presenters devote to students and families is inspiring, and I hope you're looking forward to this presentation as much as I am. I know our three presenters very well, and they are incredible people and amazingly dedicated. So please join me in welcoming our presenters.
So thank you to those of you in the room. Thanks to those of you watching online. I'm Kristin Fontichiaro. My colleague in the front row is Liz Kolb, and in the second row is Beth Sherman. And we are an intentional team that came together because we represent different disciplines. We all started our careers in K-12 schools, and we all have migrated to the university. So just a moment to think about our project today. You can see the sections that Pete already outlined for us that we'll be going over today. We want to tell you some things about Ann Arbor kids in specific and how that correlates to what we know about national kids. Liz will talk a little bit about what research tells us about the teen brain and social media. She'll also talk about some strategies for caregivers. And then Beth, our social worker, is going to talk about questions and answers with you. So a quick show of hands. How many of you are here because you have an elementary age child? How many of you a middle schooler? I see some hands going up more than once. A high schooler? A college student who's left home but you're still worried about them? Or your own digital behavior? I always confess at these that I do have one of those like 10-foot long cords to keep my phone by my bed at night. We're here today to talk about digital wellness, and we want to start by giving a bit of a description of what we mean by that. And this is a pretty comprehensive definition. It sort of replaces some earlier terms like digital citizenship or healthy screen time. And we use this really comprehensive definition because it talks about our lives online in multiple categories, including our online security and issues of privacy. Where does our information go and who has it? Our attitudes and behaviors, how we conceptualize the role of devices in our life, our attachment to our devices, and why is it that they're never out of our hands? Impulsivity and how much we respond to device notifications and whether we turn them on or off. The degree to which we think we're multitasking, and things like how long screen time lasts. And I bring up the screen time issue because oftentimes when we think about devices, that's sort of the classic advice. How long a kid is on the device is the fundamental decision. And we find that the landscape has become quite a bit more nuanced, especially since the pandemic, as kids' lives moved online and in many ways never moved back. So what we're going to do next is pass things over to Beth, who's going to talk about our U of M project a bit to set some context.
Hi. Again, Beth Sherman from the School of Social Work. I'm a newer member to the team, and I really just started learning more about digital wellness last year when I joined the team, because prior to that, my strategy was basically just yelling at my kids to get off their screens. So I was very grateful to hear and to learn about this more nuanced approach to how to really think through screen use and just become more informed. So the project that we're doing at the U of M is that it's called digital wellness, and what we do is currently we have 9 U of M students who are either graduate students in the School of Social Work, the School of Information, or the School of Education. or undergraduate students. So it's actually an interesting project because we have both undergraduate students and some graduate students. And we meet, the purpose of it is that we're going into middle schools in Ann Arbor, 3 middle schools in Ann Arbor. And what we're doing is doing near-peer mentoring, where the U of M students are teaching teaching the youth and co-communicating about digital wellness with 6th graders, and then those 6th graders are taking a leadership role in their own school where they're teaching other students about digital wellness. So it's not really a byproduct, a piece of the program is that for many weeks when we're in class with the U of M students, we're really helping those students who are, some of them are in their most of them are in their late teens, early 20s, really think about their own use. So that was also just helpful that we're not just thinking about what is use for young people, but also emerging, transition age youth, and then on into the future, emerging professionals. So we meet with the students at the U of M, and then here I'll show you. Here's some of the approach. What we want to do is we want to teach the students about how to have conversation and dialogue about what they're doing and what the 6th graders are doing. So open up conversations about what's actually happening online, and to also not take a judgment, to take more of an inquiry, sort of what are you doing, how are you doing it, how's it going, so that we're not giving people a specific list of you need, if you do this, it's okay. If you don't do this, it's okay. To be more, to become more informed and to think more and be more reflective about their use. So we also want them to talk and share about their experiences. And then this again was a bit of a shift for me, particularly as a parent, was shifting this idea that devices have really become, it's a statement of the obvious, I know to us as parents now, that devices are a part, often for many teens, it's just a part of their everyday life. So how are we helping them manage it? And then also helping the middle schoolers recognize what are some of their feelings and emotions, and some of that Liz will go into, but some of it is, maybe they start and they're gaming and they feel really good and they feel really excited, but then after they're on for a while, they can feel very bored, they can feel frustrated, they can feel disconnected, and so really helping them think through what's their actual emotional experience while they're playing, while they're online. And also, helping them come up with some of their own guidelines. Like we'll talk about this later, but we gave some of the students, the 6th graders, a challenge of, maybe being on your devices for half an hour less each week. And I was frankly, I was just a little skeptical, but when we saw them come back, a lot of them had really taken it up and had tried really hard just to sort of get a bead for what their digital use was like and what kinds of, agency they could have related to their devices, and also just acknowledging that for a lot of us there are benefits, fun, joy in terms of the devices. So I'll just show you a few. I'll show you a few of our pictures. One thing that we really want to do is have things be highly interactive. So we had the 6th graders come up to the U of M lovely School of Information building, meet with their peer mentors, their U of M peer mentors, and do activities. So again, the near peer model. And also we had them doing scavenger hunts. This is just an example of them moving around the U of M campus and exploring the campus. And of course, another piece of this is also trying to help the 6th graders sort of envision what their life might be either at the U of M or other college experiences. And again, you can see sort of interactive activities that we do with them. And then just asking them what feels healthy online, what are maybe some tricky spots in terms of being online, and reflecting about that. So, okay. So the arc of the class is that we meet with the U of M students. We do 2 symposiums where the 6th graders come up to campus for these intensive learning workshops, and then the U of M students go to the middle schools and continue to mentor and work with them, and then the kids do an end-of-the-year project for the benefit of their whole school. So, and we try to capture those materials. We were hoping that by some of the schools doing these projects, that they could also be shared with other middle schools to maybe have some of the same ideas. So this was, this was one of the things I referenced, and I'm glad to see that people are taking note. But yeah, just document your screen time use for a week. Try to cut back. The idea just for 1 week of maybe not having your digital device, your phone, in your bedroom, keeping it out of the room. You know, this whole question, we asked some of our U of M students, how many of you sleep with your phones, either right next to your bed or actually sort of, I've seen some at my house, there's some clutching of the phone while asleep, you know? So turning off notifications for a week so that you just aren't hearing those dings and interruptions. Putting things on off. And one of our U of M students just decided entirely to remove one of the apps that she just, after doing some self-reflection, she just realized she was using a lot more. I believe it was actually at the time it was TikTok. So she just deleted it from her phone as a trial period to sort of wean herself off of it in some ways. And then we asked the kids, you know, how did you feel? How did you feel by the end of the week? And did anything that you learned during this challenge, might it change your use in the future? And we do recommend this for the U of M students. We had the 6th graders do it, and also just offer it up to you as something you might want to try in your own household if you so choose. Okay, thank you.
So what we thought we would do next is talk a little bit about what Ann Arbor tweens and teens are thinking about. So I'm not going to ask you to answer anything out loud, but we asked the 6th graders, which for our project was 1 homeroom each at Scarlett, Tappan, and Clegg. Do you have a cell phone? And take a moment and ask yourself, what do you think the percentage of those 6th graders were? We often hear from 6th grade parents that kids say every 6th grader has a cell phone. All right, when you have a number in mind, in our group, only 45% had one. And we do notice that this changes quite a bit over the arc of our project. So while we do plan to grow this program, we started with 6th grade because we think it is a really pivotal year for students and devices. In most cases, sometime during 6th grade, they will get a device. And also 6th grade is sort of a natural transition point as kids in Ann Arbor move from elementary school and one teacher monitoring them all day long to a variety of instructors and kids taking on a more autonomous role. And so we're going to share some data we have from 6th graders and from 8th graders. So I mentioned that 45% of 6th graders had a phone. Now take a moment to think about what you think the pie chart would look like for 8th graders. By 8th graders, almost 90% have a phone, but still that means 10% do not. So we don't have this sort of monolithic, every single person has a phone. We've also asked questions. Every year we ask kids what their most popular websites or apps are. So take a moment and think about what you think the top 5 would be. Our 2024-2025 6th grade data is being collected as we speak. Last year for 6th graders, the top 5 sites they visited were these. And only one of these has a social component, or a social media type component where you enter information, and that's YouTube and its comments. The rest of these are mostly entertainment or communication tools. But we do notice a big shift when we asked 8th graders the same question. And here I've highlighted some things. I've highlighted the things that scholars call social media. And I bring this up because this aligns very closely with national data from Pew that shows us that, sure enough, nationally, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram are the top 4 sites used nationally, although in Ann Arbor we see a slight flip-flop between Snapchat and Instagram. So very consistent with what we see elsewhere. This is the thing I want you to take away from this complicated-looking graph is that whether you have a phone or you do not have a phone, kids are still doing the same activities online. So what we can take away from that is that it's not as easy as saying phone means access, no phone means no access. They do the same things whether they have phones or not. We also asked some questions about mental health. And again, we're a partnership between sort of a technical school in the School of Information, the education school, and the social work school. So this is where Beth's expertise comes in. We asked what they knew about screens and mental health. So we asked them, are screens healthy or unhealthy? And their choices were yes, it's always healthy. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, or no. And you will notice that 81% of students will admit that sometimes being on their devices is healthy and sometimes it is not. And I think that that is a really important thing to think about. If you are the parent of a kid in this age range, they are aware that some things online are not as great. They may tell you it's all fine, but they know. And this is one of the secrets of why we have U of M students work with middle schoolers, because U of M students feel much more like big siblings and much less like parents. And so we find that the conversation can be a little bit more transparent and open. We also asked about how much time outside of schoolwork sixth graders spend. So the darker the shade, the more time they're spending on their devices. And you'll see that most people are spending 2 hours or less. And only look at that darkest mark there for those who spend 5 or more hours. And again, these are Ann Arbor kids, they're our own neighbors. Let's compare it with 8th graders. See that darkest pie slice on the left of people who use it over 5 hours a day? Look how it changes with 8th graders. There is a significant difference in the amount of time that 6th to 8th graders spend online, keeping in mind 6th graders really aren't looking at social media except for YouTube. 8th graders are. So there is something in the water in middle school that changes over time. We also asked 6th graders, what do you do online that's healthy? And the top 3 trends we find is that they want to use their devices to communicate with you, their parents and caregivers, with family and friends, sometimes with teachers. And it's a way for them to be connected to other people. And that's really important for us to think about when we're weighing the trajectory of where we want to go with our families, that kids see their phones as ways to connect to other people. And in the midst of this post-pandemic loneliness epidemic that we keep reading about, I think it's really important to recognize how often they talk about family and how important it is to connect to family. They also talk about video games. Video games for many kids are the play dates of their middle school years, that they like to play games together. They like to be good partners. So they like to make sure they finish a round, so they're a good friend online, and that they don't just yank out of the game and their friends don't know where they've gone. And sometimes they call each other and play games while they're on phone or FaceTime with each other. And we find that they think their schoolwork is something that they do in a healthy way as well. They are also able to tell us that there are things they don't think are healthy, and these are the 2 top trends when we asked 6th graders last year. They have a lot to say about being out of balance. Out of balance meaning seeing things that are inappropriate or weird. They're able to articulate things like doom scrolling in 6th grade. They're worried that information may not be accurate. They're worried about random people texting. They're worried about being on devices too much or their screen time being too much, that they will play too many games or spend too much time on YouTube, and they were worried about TikTok. So again, we often have these perceptions that kids are too little, 6th graders are too young to know what is good and bad about their online time. They are aware. And also they are acutely aware that they certainly get the message that cyberbullying exists on the right-hand side, that people might say mean things, and that people may pull some tricks and borrow someone's email account or post about other people. And I think it's really important to recognize this awareness because this gives us an entry point as parents, caregivers, family members of middle grade kids and above, because it tells us that they see some of what we see. We can also say that these were all questions we asked 8th graders, Ann Arbor 8th graders. Have you ever done any of these things? Have you ever changed something online because someone asked you to? Have you been on your device longer than you should have? Have you ever tried to soothe yourself by using your phone? Have you ever been ghosted? Have you ever felt upset that you didn't get enough likes or notifications? And every 8th grader said at least one of these things had happened to them. So our kids do have a pretty realistic sense. And I bring that up because to compare that with national data, we see the same balance. So we're going back to Pew. If those of you who are listening at home or in the room are interested, the Pew Research Center does a lot of research about social media, influencers, the role of devices, across ages, across political ideologies. And this is a 2-part graphic, so we'll start with the part on the left, which is that the majorities of teens, this is ages 13 to 17, a bit older than some of those 6th graders, do say that social media gives them a place to be connected with other people, to feel creative and to feel supported. This is particularly important for kids who are LGBTQ+, that they often feel that they are understood and that they are not alone when they look at online. And they're most likely to say that when all is said and done, social media does give them more positives than negatives, mostly in terms of socializing, that they really do see their social world is online. And that's so different from how many of us grew up, which was like just run down the street and find someone to play with and come back by dinner time. You know, the worlds they grow up in are different than the worlds many of us may have grown up with as family or caregivers. We do want to spend a moment to talk about gender in just a moment, and that is that when it comes to what Pew calls online drama, and Beth wants to warn us about labeling any kind of kid behavior as being drama because it can sometimes downplay the realistic sense that it really does hurt those kids' feelings in big ways. We do know that females are more negatively impacted by big events happening online, by big emotions online than boys are. And so there are 2 kinds of vulnerabilities that may be different. So if you have kids of different genders in your household, just be aware that you may have kids that respond differently. And I will also point out that this study only looked at boys and girls. It did not talk about non-binary kids, so we don't have research about that. So those are all things that we see both in the Ann Arbor data and we see in the national data. Here's 5 things we've learned from working with middle school students that I hope will cheer you into your own conversations. What we find is that middle school students want to talk about issues like their phones and what's good to be on phones and what's not. However, they do not want to be told what to do. In many ways, they are like us, right? And we also know that they can give you the correct answers about what is considered safe or unsafe and what is better behavior and non-better behavior, but they then make up their own secret rules by which they make decisions. And so if all we do is lecture middle schoolers about what they're doing and what they shouldn't be doing, we ignore the fact that they have this secret decision making. So our goal in our work is to open up what feel like private decisions and see if we can make those more, bring those into the conversation and make them more widely shareable. We know that middle school students can not only tell us the rules, but they often cannot tell us why a rule exists. And they like real-world examples. They love looking at other people's social media and determining if they've made good or bad decisions. They love to know what really happens. And oftentimes, if you think about some of us who have been around a while, how do we sometimes talk about internet safety? 1, do something wrong and you'll go to jail, or 2, do something wrong and you'll be kidnapped, right? And those are both super rare options that could happen to kids, but they want to know also what's in between those choices. What are some more realistic things about things like reputation management and things like that? We know that unless you open the conversation, middle school students tend not to talk to their parents about their digital activities, but that they can be open to those conversations, particularly when you are driving in the front seat of the car and the child is in the back seat. That seems to be a particularly sweet spot for those conversations to unfold. And finally, we're always surprised that every year kids can't wait to talk about gray areas of online behaviors. Even though their brains are still on the edge of being a little bit more concrete and literal, they are excited to talk about gray areas. They're not afraid of it, and so they are ready to have those conversations with you, as long as they perceive that they're in what Planet Fitness would call a judgment-free zone, that they don't want to feel that they will be judged or punished. And so we know that when adults can be open to conversation and can make that space for the conversation to unfold without judgment, we have a lot more success. And now to talk some more about resources like these, here comes Liz.
Thanks, Kristen. All right, some good stuff there. Hi, everyone. So I am Liz Kolb. I'm at the School of Education, and I was a middle school teacher for many years, so this is definitely my sweet spot. And I have a middle schooler and a high schooler, so definitely my sweet spot in different ways. We wanted to share in the presentation, and we'll put the QR code up again at the end of the presentation, some resources that we lean into a little bit. I'm going to start talking here a little bit more about some of the brain science that we use to inform the work that we do, as well as that we share with the middle schoolers. So a lot of that brain science does come from the APA, and there's a couple of great pieces that they have put out, but the chief scientist from the APA has really outlined a lot of what we know, in particular around social media and gaming, and what happens to the brain with that in our youth. So I'm going to share a little bit more about that. We also have some just expert tips for thinking about, in particular, social media with our younger people, and the data that Kristin mentioned is up there. A couple of books that we recommend to Raising Humans in a Digital World by Diana Graeber, and it just has some great tips and ideas of what you can do in different scenarios. There's also a book at the very bottom there called Digital for Good, which is put out by Richard Kulata. Again, another just great resource. And then we really like the American Academy of Pediatrics just has developed a great website called healthychildren.org. I'm going to reference it a few times in the presentation with different things. So those are just some handy resources that you might find helpful after this. So a couple of things, we are not brain scientists. I do want to say that first. We are referencing the data and the evidence that other great scientists have put together. And again, it's in the research that we just put on the previous slide. But one of the things that we found is that our middle schoolers want to know why. If we're saying, don't do this, do that, don't do that, you can't be on your screen too long, or don't take it to bed at night, that doesn't make sense to them necessarily. So one of the things that we try to do is empower them with some of the data around why we're saying that, why we're telling that, and we need to be able to support that. And so these are a few things that we talk with our middle schoolers about as to why maybe they want to think about certain decisions that they're making. And one of the big things that we talk with them about is the fact that the teen brain up until the age of 24 is just really not fully developed yet. And it doesn't really close off until around the age of 24 in your mid-20s. And what that really means for them, and something we talk with them about, is that it means it's just harder for them to resist temptations than it is for somebody that's older, because that part of their brain isn't fully functioning like it should yet. So that means that once they're around age 11, they start to crave attention, not from mom and dad anymore. They don't care as much about that validation, although it's still important. They care a lot more about the validation from their peers. And that's been as old as time, right? Doesn't matter if we had technology or not. That's just been true to this particular age group. And it's very normal. It's very normal to want to have that validation affirmation from their peers. And what we do know around social media is that it really plays into that. Social media You might be seeing a lot of reports out there that places like TikTok and Snapchat were very much aware that they were using this kind of science and creating applications to play into getting teens and tweens addicted to their apps. And one of the things that we talk with our middle schoolers about, or we pose the question, we'll say, why do you think a for-profit company like Snapchat is going to let you use their application for free? You can download it for free, you can use it for free, you can go all over it, you don't have to buy anything. And then we start to talk about, well, it's because they're using your data, right? And they're using what you put into it, and they're selling that to other people. So once we start to have those conversations, they kind of go, oh, so what I'm putting in there isn't mine anymore. Yeah, it's not yours, it's somebody else's. They own it. They own those pictures. They own what you're putting in there, and they can do what they want with it. And that actually really gives them a whole different perspective than just the no, don't do it, or we're worried about you doing it. And so we talk with them about how social media really plays into where their brain is right now, and it helps. And we also talk to them about the fact, because their brain isn't fully closed, they are more likely to become addicted to social media. Adults become addicted to social media, and they are definitely much more likely to, because of the fact that they don't have that impulse control yet. And then we also kind of showed them some graphics. We talked to them a little bit about how, they're working more from, I use a little laser pointer there. They're working more from the emotional side of their brain and kind of the enjoyment pleasure side. That's very normal for them. We talk about, that's totally normal. That's where you're working from. So when you have those knee-jerk reactions to something and you immediately respond in your text message, or you immediately post something in social media, you don't tend to take 24 hours to think about it first, or to have a more nuanced reaction. Whereas adults, when after their brain is fully closed, are working more from kind of the logical and reasoning side of their brain. So again, explaining why you had that quick reaction, why you did what you did, and later on go, oh gosh, that was kind of mean, or it wasn't so kind. So giving them some of that information can be helpful. A few other things we know from the research that are maybe a little bit more bothersome and concerning is that we know that screen use, and particularly around social media and excessive gaming, and again, excessive, not doing a little bit of it, but excessively, has the potential to change the structure of the brain development. So the brain might not fully form and might not grow to be the size that it is supposed to be. You might end up lacking that impulse control permanently that you're supposed to eventually get. The emotional competency, that type of thing, you might never fully get if you are excessively engaging in things like social media and gaming. So scientists and researchers are seeing some of this. So that's also something, again, we talk with the middle schoolers about, and the importance of making sure their brain fully grows. And we talk to them about things they can do to make sure that happens. One of the other things that, has been alluded to already is the sleeping piece, and I don't think this is a shock to anyone, but yes, we are seeing that. Teenagers are sleeping less, and they need their sleep, right? Of all times, their bodies are still growing, the brains really are growing, and when does the brain grow? It grows when they're sleeping. So they are sleeping less and less soundly because they have devices near them, devices in their room, or they're using devices and screens right up until they go to bed, and then their brains are still thinking through everything that's happening, all the drama that was happening in their device. So they're just not getting to sleep as quickly as maybe they could. And then we know not having enough sleep shows up in many different ways, emotionally and physically, into the classroom, as well as just into stress, anxiety, depression. We see those pieces. We also like to talk with the middle schoolers specifically about how exactly are these applications addictive. We ask them to guess, and they tend to guess a lot of things. Like, they know some stuff, they see it, but in particular, social media and gaming. So we talk with them about, these are the 5 top ways that apps are created to be addictive. And we take a look at that, and we ask them to notice it and to pay attention to it. So those notifications clearly are one way. Having the little, notification symbol in the app to show you there's a couple messages in there, and it's just so tempting to go look at it, or having something something pop up on your phone or a noise immediately triggers your brain into that space again. Pulling to refresh. Most social media applications automatically refresh. You don't have to pull to refresh, but the idea of pulling down feels kind of like a slot machine. It kind of feels like fun, and I'm going to see something new, even though you're just going to see old stuff or advertisements, and not really anything new. It gives you that feeling that there's always new stuff, so I can't leave the app because there's always something new in here. The infinite scrolling, the never ending, right? You never get to a point where it says the end, stop, you're done. We are starting to see places like Instagram are building in the take a break. They're getting a lot of pressure with lawsuits and things to start to build in something if someone's been on an app for a few hours to like have a little message that says take a break or look at your mental health. When I've talked with students about that, they're like, oh yeah, we just kind of ignore it. But they're trying. The warmer colors, even we talk about this, we show them examples of when things like, Instagram started, it kind of had cooler colors to it. And these companies did all this research and found if they use a warmer tone, people are more likely to be drawn into it and to stay into it. So even something as simple as the colors that they're choosing and the color scheme. And then, of course, like in the video game world, lots of kind of the no winning of the games, like the never ending games. You can always be at a new level. You can always get more points. You can always get more rewards. It just never ends. So you always want to be in it. And of course, the multiplayer game, because you can play with all your friends and have lots of people in it. So these are just a few examples that we talk with them about. This is a handout that we give to families that kind of summarizes some of the brain science we know around social media based on the APA report. So I'm not going to kind of go through every single category, but we just want to emphasize that, this is kind of one way to summarize and to kind of think through each one of these and make sure that we're aware of the concerns, at the same time recognizing that, devices aren't going away anytime soon. So what can we do? So it's really tricky. It's very difficult as caregivers. We're trying to do the best we can, and nobody does it perfect. There's no perfect science to it. We are all really doing the best we can with it, and I include myself in that because I'm in the teen world with devices all the time, and it's a lot. So a few things that are recommended. So there's different types of monitoring that we can do, right? So you might be very familiar with the restrictive monitoring, which is where you are kind of tracking your kids. Like you're tracking the GPS, you're watching every text message, you're putting limits on things. I'm limiting screen time, I'm limiting apps, putting all that stuff in there, and I'm trying to make sure my kid doesn't know my secret code to do it. And that has been found to be helpful in minimizing like screen time, like the amount of time spent on screens. Yes, it is effective to do that. So yes, and that's not a bad thing. However, it has not been as effective when it comes to children making better choices when it comes to what they're doing online and on their devices. So if their screen time is limited through their device, they might go to their friend's device and do something. Or if they know mom and dad are paying attention to their text messages, then they're going to find a way to message through Snapchat that you can't see or something else. So they'll find ways around it and work around it if they're only having restrictive monitoring. So even if you feel like you're doing everything you can, I can't tell you how many high schoolers I know that have the burner phones, or their friend had 2 phones, so they're using one of them, or they'll leave a phone at school while they go off campus, so their parents think that their GPS is still tracking them at school. Like, they're really creative about how they get around the restrictive monitoring. But restrictive monitoring can be helpful, so it's not that you shouldn't have some of that in place. But what the research has found is that you also have to have in place active monitoring. And active monitoring really means like having these conversations that Kristin was talking about with the teens, talking with them about why there's dangers out there, what your concerns are, a little bit about the brain science even. Like, one of the things I say to my son all the time when he's like, oh, why can't I use my phone past 9:30? And I'm like, well, because your brain needs to grow. So you got to turn it off because your brain's going to grow tonight. I need it to grow. So just having those conversations. Also, as much as you can, try to do things with them. If they're on Snapchat and you don't use Snapchat, get on there, do it with them. If they're doing TikTok, do it with them. Depends on the kid, right? Some children will engage with you, some will not, but make the effort to try. Play the games with them. Have conversations. If they don't want to play with you, at least talk to them about who are you playing with. Are you playing with friends? Are these good conversations you're having in the games? Are you being collaborative? Does it seem mean and nasty and negative? So that has been found to actually help a lot more with children making better decisions. So restrictive can help with this time on screen, and then adding in that active monitoring can actually help with the choices that they're making on the screens. So we like to use the tech guidelines, talk about our media use, make sure that we're educating and talking with the children about what are these risks and why. Co-use with them as much as possible, just like we read books together for learning literacy and enjoyment of reading. There's a strong push towards co-using with the children. And then definitely having some house rules that make sense around the media use. So, and the house rules definitely have to be things that you can live with, that you feel like aren't completely changing your entire lives in certain ways. So they do have to be things you can live with, and they can change over time because children will grow and get older, and maybe they've earned new permissions and things like that. A couple things just to keep in mind that we've learned is that what is healthy for one child is not necessarily healthy for another. If you have more than one child, you probably know that. They're very different. They have different personalities. They kind of are drawn to different types of things. And so one child might be able to go on TikTok and not really have a lot of issues around the addictive nature of it and can get off of it okay. And another one will have a lot of issues with it. So it really depends on their personality. The other advice that a lot of experts have said is that be careful of too much restriction. I've already mentioned that a little bit, but when you are so restrictive that your child can only have an hour on a phone, a week, and they can't use any of these apps, they will find a way to use it. We've learned that from talking with the sixth graders over and over again for many years, that they find a way to get on those apps, whether it's through friends, whether it's through fake email accounts, and then they're doing all sorts of things that you have no idea what's going on. So it's better to at least say, okay, you can have it, but I get the login, I get the password, I get to check it occasionally, and have some conversations around it. And then make sure, one kind of rule of thumb is make sure the child is getting an hour of exercise a day. If they're getting at least 8 hours of sleep and they're having social interactions, it's great if the social interactions are in person, but even if the social interactions are gaming with friends in a positive way where they're having good conversations and they're being collaborative, that is okay too. If those things are happening, then it's probably okay. If those things aren't happening, we might want to rethink a few things. So this comes from the website I had given you before. The American Academy of Pediatrics has put out their healthychildren.org website, and they have these wonderful kind of guides called the 5 C's for different age groups. And these are just some things to kind of think about when we're thinking about, especially social media, because that's always the really tricky one. Is thinking about your child and their personality first. What is their personality? What do they tend to be attracted to? And how does that kind of affect them? Are they attracted to watching a lot of kitten videos on YouTube? Does that affect them in a way that makes them happy? Great, that's a good thing. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Also, is the social media feeding into anxieties that they already have? Or maybe they have some stressors or some depression. Is it feeding that and making it worse, or is it helping to make it better? It's funny, I was telling Beth this, I've talked with some therapists who I was asking them, what do you do when it comes to things like phones and social media, and a child might be having issues of depression or anxiety, sometimes severe. And they said, well, 10 years ago, we used to say, oh, remove the phone, just completely get rid of it. But they said, now we've learned that sometimes the phone actually, having a little social interaction through the phone can be helpful to keeping them connected and not completely isolating themselves. So it really depends on the child a little bit. the content, right? So what is the content that they're viewing and looking at? Does the content affect them in a way that makes them happier, makes them sadder? So, trying to also get them in touch with the feelings again, like Kristin was talking about, so important. How are you feeling when you're watching these YouTube videos? How are you feeling when you're playing games with your friends? Are you getting joy out of it? Are you just frustrated and angry? What are those feelings that are coming out with the content that you're viewing? Calm. One of the things that we like to encourage is like, how do you manage your devices so you can fall asleep at night? So, what are you doing so that you can go to bed soundly? Are you turning them off at a certain time? Are you setting it up so that maybe you're using your device to have like some white noise in the background, or you're reading your book on it? So maybe you're using it in a way that actually helps you get calm, or maybe you're using it in a way that keeps your brain going. So thinking about the calm. Crowding out, I think this is really a great one. Our devices crowding out things that we do enjoy doing. And so how do we want to prioritize? So thinking about what are the 2 or 3 things that you want to prioritize that aren't necessarily related to devices, and make sure you're doing those every day, whether it's exercise or, hanging out with friends or walking the dog or whatever it might be, getting your homework done. Make sure you prioritize those first before jumping on that device. And then also the communication piece, right? Really encouraging ourselves to talk with the kids about what they're doing, even if they don't respond back, because I know some kids don't. Keep trying to have those conversations, have them in the car when they have to be there with you. Tell them your own stories if they don't want to tell you theirs. At least share your stories about, gosh, I was getting really stressed watching, the news feed yesterday, and so I had to turn off my device so I could de-stress. Even if they don't respond to that, they're hearing you. So at least have those conversations. Even if you say, who are you texting with, and they don't tell you, then you can say, I was texting with grandma the other day and this was happening. So it's okay that they're not responding back. It's very normal at that age, at middle school and high school age, to not respond back. Eventually they probably will, but it might take some time. So those 5 C's can be helpful. And then finally, one of the things that we mentioned in the the TECH, is that we have a plan for screen use. So, and the plan has to make sense for you and your family situation. So again, it's going to be different depending on your situation. These are some suggestions of things that tend to help with healthy device use and might be something that's reasonable for your family, such as avoiding the bedrooms, or no devices a certain amount of time before bed, but maybe you sit down together and watch a family TV show. So you still do something fun on a screen, but it's not individual devices. Or, making sure we're giving warnings before removing devices. So as I think Beth and Kristin were mentioning, like video gaming, right, for kids. Like, you don't want to leave your friends in the lurch. So if you have to leave in 10 minutes, give them the 10-minute warning. You got to get off your device in 10 minutes. Tell your friends you're leaving in 10 minutes. So they can have those warnings so that they're not upset with you when they have to leave their friends in the lurch. Just building in the routines, try to model it as much as we can. I know it's hard, but just the other day, we do have a rule, like when we watch our family show at night, we're not supposed to have devices. And I was like on my device, my daughter was somewhere at like a tournament, so I was like checking the scores, and my son was like, I'm not supposed to be on my device, so you can't be on your device. And he really shamed me about it, but he was right. I'm like, okay, you're right, I gotta put it away. Also, who they friend and who they follow. What are your rules around that? Our rules at our family is you have to know them in person. Like, you can't follow random friends of friends, and it happens a lot around here because schools are so big. We set up new apps together to make sure that they're safe and okay. Deciding about social media. Are you going to be okay with social media that doesn't have privacy options, like a VSCO kind of thing? Take device breaks, have certain family times that might be device break time. Maybe it's dinner, maybe it's breakfast, maybe it's at night before bed, whatever works for your family. So these are just some suggestions of like what might work, and there's other suggestions in the link there. All right, so that is probably quite a bit of information, but we also wanted to spend the last few minutes just to see if anyone had any questions. I know we just have a huge audience here, but we're happy to take any questions if you do have some.
Were there any questions that anyone particularly came here that you're hoping to get out of it, or?
I mean, do you make a distinction that all of this behavior is, well, just normal and this is how it's going to be now, or that perhaps the child is actually addicted to the device? Could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah, the question was, right, when we're sort of talking about, well, these are some things that you can do in your family, et cetera, are we making any distinctions between kids that are actually addicted? I really, really appreciate the question, because you're right. The sort of, the part that we're sharing information about is often when we're talking about sort of routine, how do you routinely manage this, that, or the other thing. We're also, it is increasingly, and there is good research that for some people and some children, that there really is an addictive aspect to it. I mean, not just that, the apps are set up to be addictive, but the kids actually have, I'm now just doing something, I'm just, doing things with the screen.
My computer,
But,
so I'll just.
yeah, just that there are kids that actually, and so the things that you would look like, I mean, there's, even in some of the, the diagnostic manuals, there's updates in terms of there being addiction related to screens. So I think that we're talking about garden variety, this is what you can do, and with also the acknowledgement that for some children, it really is going to become a problem, and that it's likely that the family's going to need to seek more help and intervention, because the kinds of things we're talking about just are not going to work, if that makes sense, yeah? And so, I mean, the things you would look for is significant mood changes when they're going off, major rule violations to be on, even though you set parental limits or family limits and consequences. Them feeling like they make an intention not to do it, but they just can't follow it. So just thank you for that. It's a great point.
And I just wanted to add to Beth, there's Boston Children's Hospital has a clinic for device addiction, and they actually have great resources on their website for parents to go to. It's kind of like a survey you can almost fill out to see how the scale of where your child might fit based on the questions they have. So
It's like a screener. It sounds like
Yeah,
an
it's
addiction screener for screen use.
yes, so
Great.
kind of and it has some of the questions like Beth was mentioning, right? Like the mood changes, the emotion changes, the not being able to remove themselves from the device, even with warnings and punishments.
It's the kind
and
of
all
thing
that.
you think
Yeah.
about for other kinds of substance use difficulties.
And if I can add one thing, keeping in mind that social media is run by algorithms, it's not just showing them, these are the people you have chosen to follow. It is elevating other voices, and part of what makes someone popular to an algorithm and more likely to be shown is that their content is a little wilder, a little more emotional, a little more hyperbolic. And so social media is run by people who are constantly figuring out how to keep you online longer. So it is a formidable, it's a formidable environment for youth to be in, and it's a formidable environment for us as adults to be in as well. And so I do think it's important that in these discussions of healthy habits, we talk about there are some things that may be out of your control, because so many experts have engineered it so you will stay on that device and never run out of posts to see, and never run out of things that deliver that little hit of dopamine that makes you feel just a little bit better, but it doesn't last long enough for you to put the device down and walk away. And so we do encourage you, if you feel like you have someone for whom they do not feel in control anymore, then seek someone with professional experience who can help you with that as well.
And I just wanted to add also that the social media will say you have to, you're supposed to be 13 in order to get an account. And that's an arbitrary number. It's based on the COPPA federal law. And the app creators just don't want to deal with the law. And the law says, under 13, they have to have certain security and privacy things in place. But 13 by no means that a child is developmentally ready or can handle social media. So the argument that, well, if they're 13, they can go on this Sure, but can they emotionally handle it? Maybe not, depending on your child.
I have students that are not in middle school yet, and just in terms of maybe kind of stepwise increasing usage, do you have recommendations for, watches that can only interact in text but not go online, or maybe like a phone with a game but that they can't go online and use social media? Any recommendations or thoughts on?
I don't have a specific recommendation, but I know that all the, are there any recommendations for elementary age parents where their children are starting to enter this space for technology that maybe isn't completely accessible for everything? So like a watch or kind of a phone that can just do certain like small things, like maybe make phone calls or send a few text messages. I personally don't have a particular brand of recommendation, but I know that just about every cell phone company now does make a cell phone where they can just be very limited. So whatever your cell phone company is, I would go to them and find out what the choices are with that, and choose within that. I would say another recommendation I have, just as this is my own parenting experience, is that if you can talk to some of your children's friends' parents to see what they're doing, and if you can get on the same page with a couple of them where maybe you want to wait a little bit longer before they're going to get social media, before they're going to get a phone, or before they're going to be able to text or whatever it might be. I know there's a whole movement of like wait till 8th. Then your child's not going to be the only one. And socially, it's really hard when your child is the only one, and that's a big deal for them. So if you can right now get on board with a few other families to say, like, let's wait a little bit longer, and we'll just continue certain communications in certain ways, maybe get a very basic phone from our cell phone company where they can have 5 numbers on it type of thing. So.
Do you find like any benefits to trying to delay, for instance, social media access, or really restrict that or something? As they go from 4th, 5th,
Yeah.
to, up to 8th or something.
I do think, as you saw with Kristin's data up there, there are some benefits in terms of, I think, brain development, because their brains, the older they can get without having to be so engaged in social media and so engaged in some of these spaces, I think it does help their brains to have that kind of full development with it. I do think socially, the older they get, it gets harder to not be part of these spaces. I know that once they get into high school, they tend to not text message. They tend to use Snapchat for all their messaging. So if they're not on Snapchat, they feel like they're really missing out on a lot of socialization. So it does get harder once they get into, I would say, like 8th, 9th grade to not have access to these things. I think prior to that, it's not as hard because there's still a lot of parents willing to help with communications and other ways to do it. And they're just entering that space. So there isn't as much social pressure to have it. I would say around 6th, 7th grade, but once they get into 8th, there's a lot more social pressure with it.
I would just use the metaphor of a bicycle as well. Like, we don't give a 4th grader a 10-speed bike right away as their first bike. It's okay. Italians have a phrase, to go far, go slow. Sometimes telling yourself, we'll try this less accessible device. If it feels too restrictive for them, it's much easier to move into a faster device than to pull a smartphone out of a kid's hand. But the amount of power that is in a smartphone, the number of things it can do for and to you, is something we really think about. We don't give 12-year-olds the keys to cars and say, well, you'll grow into it someday. Everybody will have to learn to drive someday, right? And so I think moving slower, knowing you can speed up, may be helpful.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's very informative and useful. So appreciate you coming out and sharing your expertise.